I first got really interested in photography in the mid-'80s when Barbara and I bought a weekend house in Easton, Connecticut. The eyes of this city boy were opened wide to the joys of nature. I was fascinated by the trees and foliage, the reflections on water, the wildlife, the changes of season, and so on. Add to that the interplay of light and shadow, and that's when I began to experiment with black and white film. Later, in the mid-'90s, we put a darkroom in our Easton house, and I spent many fascinating hours there printing 8x10 black and white images. No color. I couldn't handle that. It was an escape from the world of computers and advanced technology that I had difficulty confronting. And I cherished the workaday, low-tech atmosphere of an old-fashioned darkroom, watching the prints emerge slowly from the trays of chemicals. My heart, though, was still in New York City, where we lived all week and my demanding legal practice was based. But our townhouse was only a half block from Central Park, with its mix of beautiful vistas, statuary, and handsome trees, and bridges that look great in color or in black and white. All set against the backdrop of the grand apartment buildings on the perimeter streets, Central Park became my photographic playground of choice, especially after I retired from the law firm at the end of 1996 and had much more time to shoot. This ultimately led, in the year 2000, to an exhibit entitled A Park for All Seasons of 225 of my photos presented by the New York City Parks Department at its Arsenal Gallery. That in turn led to a book published in 2001 by Fordham University Press entitled Central Park, A Photographic Excursion. Then, with more time on my hands, I broadened my scope from the park onto the avenues and cross streets of Manhattan, in search of new photographic locales and subjects. It's a wonderful venue to work on your photographic chops. By 2003, I had taken enough good photos to have a show of over 150 of them entitled Slices of the Big Apple at the National Arts Club. And this resulted in another book published in 2004 by Fordham Press with the title Slices of the Big Apple, a photographic tour of the streets of New York. But during these and subsequent years, I wasn't limiting my photography to Easton and New York. We took some trips and I shot some majestic landscapes, interesting cities, animals, and so on. During all these pre-digital years, I always had two cameras dangling from my neck when I was out on a shoot, one with color film and the other with black and white film, because I always wanted to be able to shoot both ways. Obviously, some scenes need color, for instance, to highlight the varied hues of autumn. Others cry out for black and white, especially winter scenes. Others look good both ways, and I would shoot with both barrels. And then along came digital cameras and the accompanying software. And all of a sudden, you didn't need two cameras. You can shoot in color and then convert to black and white and edit it in the computer. For a while, I still shot black and white film so I could use my darkroom to develop and print the results. But then I must admit, the last time I was in the darkroom, watching the print slowly emerge in the pan from the chemicals I'd assembled, I found myself impatiently tapping my foot and mouthing the words, "This is taking a long time." Since then, sad to say, my darkroom has remained vacant, and Barbara keeps threatening to turn it into another bathroom. All of which is by way of introduction to this project. Our lives are so filled with bright color images these days, movies, television, internet, and so on, that the black and white format can seem old-fashioned. But I, for one, continue to be attracted to it in terms of still photography. In a sense, the term black and white is a misnomer because in only a few cases, such as atop a glacier, do these extremes dominate the photo. Rather, black and white photography is really all about shades of gray. It's the gradations in intensity that provide the necessary contrast to make a black and white photograph come alive. The fact is that colors that contrast sharply in color photography, but are equally intense, may produce weak and uninteresting contrasts in black and white. Conversely, a dull color photograph may revive when converted to black and white. And some photographs that might be considered too blatant in color can be successfully calmed down in black and white. It's not only the contrasting tones that make for good results in black and white. Patterns can be very important. The same with textures. And you can employ silhouettes to advantage, and shadows. So what I did was to go through all the thousands of pictures I've taken in the past 25 years and select the ones I feel do best in black and white. I have not included photos that appeared in my 2 books. The older ones were originally shot with black and white film. The later ones were shot digitally in color and downloaded into the computer that way. Then I converted them to black and white with a single touch of a button. But they needed more help, so I worked with the dials controlling contrast, exposure, highlights, shadows, levels, etc., to end up with the best black and white quality for the shot. Here's another example. I've divided the subject matter of this DVD into 4 principal categories. The first is animals, mostly of the wild variety, first in zoos, then in other habitats, and then in the South African bush, where I was able in one short trip to photograph all of what's referred to there as the Big Five: elephants, rhinos, Cape buffalo, lions, and leopards. The second category is cities, touching on a number of them, other than New York, which is well covered in my books. The best international venue was Paris. The best U.S. locale was San Francisco. The third category is people from a lot of places, with my favorite venues being New Orleans and New York City, with photos subsequent to those appearing in my books. The fourth category contains landscapes and other scenic attractions, ranging from Australia and South Africa to various locales across America. I've included a short section on what I call a touch of color, black and white scenes with 1 or 2 key elements in color. There's also a brief section on the use of sepia to add a bygone look to a scene. This DVD runs for about 75 minutes and contains over 850 photos. If that's too much to take in one gulp, just select one of these section designations in the opening screen and you can navigate to any of the listed categories. To fit all the photos in, we used an average 5-second duration for each. But if you see something that you'd like to peruse more closely, just hit the reverse button and then the pause. I hope you'll enjoy this photo compilation with which I'm celebrating my 80th birthday. I'm a big fan of zoos, and whenever I get to a city that has one, I try to pay a visit. This one is in Sydney, Australia, the city you can see in the background. When it comes to animals, no species is more photogenic than a giraffe, especially when there's more than one of them, so as to form some acute angles. Those long necks, the spindly legs, and even the little horns on their crown. But this loving smooch is my favorite giraffe shot from a zoo. The good old Bronx Zoo, as it happens. Here, at Busch Gardens in Tampa, some zebras have stumbled upon the giraffe's feeding grounds. Fortunately, the two species get along well, as does the meandering pelican. Speaking of zebras, these guys are the classic image for black and white photography. You don't have to do much tinkering. But every zebra's stripe pattern is distinct, like human fingerprints. I like it when there are two zebras, here sideways, here at a 90-degree angle, here one face, one butt, and here two butts. Zebras bring notorious backside flashers who like to show off their derrieres when you're taking a picture. By the way, the other frequent giraffe buddy is an ostrich. And they, in turn, can also form some neat photographic angles. Gorillas also do very well in black and white. Big apes are okay walking, although I like to observe them best when they're sitting down. And when they're seated, they're usually eating. What's going into this guy's mouth? But it's the looks gorillas give you that make for fine photographic images. Rhinos are huge animals, but I like to zoom in on their heads and those wonderful horns. And don't neglect what's below the horn. Bears are not always so photogenic, but here's a good shot of the head. And here's one of the other parts. The face of the camel holds a certain photographic fascination. And two faces are even better than one. But it can't compare to the double hump, especially when the two humps are out of kilter. This swimmer and the next are, I believe, seals, not sea lions. This beached baby and the next pair are, I believe, sea lions, not seals. Contact me if you want to find out the clues to their identity. A big turtle, old as Methuselah, is indeed a creature to ponder. Here's a group of smaller turtles who are blissfully unaware of any lurking danger. Here's the hidden danger. A huge crocodile, not an alligator, I've concluded, based on the head shape. And here he comes, sidling up to the unsuspecting turtles. I won't tell you how it came out, but these crocodiles do look pretty content. As for birds, here's a perky, sparrow-like flyer. Here are two vertically spaced pelicans. And here, to the delight of this black and white photographer, is an albino peacock. In addition to zoos, we can also see large animals in the circus, as this grouping of tigers makes clear. And elephants like these are the star animal attraction of many a circus. But now we're down on several animal farms in South Africa, one featuring elephants up close. This formidable-looking beast is a wildebeest, sometimes called a gnu with a silent G, in crossword puzzles especially. Here's a small herd of wildebeest. Check out this amiable cheetah up close. If you want to get really close, here's what a cheetah's hide really looks like. Oh, excuse me, for that you do need color. On the seaside road between Cape Town and the Cape of Good Hope, we stopped for lunch and spotted this whale. Along that same road is an unprepossessing cove. Guess what it contains? Penguins! Another ideal subject for black and white photography. In fact, there's a whole rookery of penguins in this place. Hey, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up. Now to Sydney, Australia. By the way, this isn't a picture of a dog that's larger than the bridge in the background. He's just a sculpture in greenery. It's the birds in the foreground I had in mind. They take their cattle seriously in Sydney, as these prize specimens well show. But I prefer the more intimate mothering images from the outback. As well as this study in sheep shearing. Still in Sydney, at the track, and now in New York, at Belmont Park. And while we're on cattle and horses, check out these examples on farmland near the Delaware-Pennsylvania border. I do like these last two pictures in black and white. But now we're in South Africa, the Singida Game Preserve adjacent to Kruger National Forest. And there are no bars on cages or moats between humans and wild animals. And it's that frisson of exposure, of vulnerability, of potential danger that makes the safari experience unlike being in any zoo or animal farm, like with the leopard. A fascinating, handsome creature, here up in the tree to which he retreats with the remains of his antelope prey to avoid contact with scavengers. And here's the leopard's big rival, the hyena, who interrupts the leopard's repasts. The hyena uses its vice-like jaws to get to the marrow of a meal. Antelopes abound in Singida. But I'm always on the lookout for the solo player. And how about the horns on this kudu? One of my favorite safari photos was of this tender wildebeest moment. Here's a pair of 1,600-pound Cape buffaloes. Here's a couple of pounds of dwarf mongoose. I've heard that hippos are responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other animal. Hippos prefer the water because the sun harms their skin. In the zoo, we focused on the rhino's head and horn. In the wild, you get the full picture of these huge beasts. Here's the big guy. Elephants travel in family groups. And the size contrast between parent and child is really something to see. Combined with leopards, rhinos, and Cape buffalo, we've now seen 4 of what's known as on African safaris as the Big Five. But where's the 5th, the lion? Here are the first lions we finally spotted, but they were fast asleep, and the males were adolescent, lacking the trademark mane. Ah, here are the big guys. And they're coming right towards us. But no problem, and here's the mane that was missing. A tender moment of paw licking. And then a snooze. And now we conclude the animal portion of our portfolio with one of my favorite photos of intertwined giraffes. Come to think of it, you really should see this one in its original color tones. "25 years ago, we went to Tokyo and Hong Kong. A great trip, but with an inferior camera. So just 2 pictures here apiece. I've got to get back there someday. "7 years later, I spent 6 weeks in Sydney, Australia, trying to settle a big case, and with a better camera. Here are 3 shots from different heights. Now we're down in the harbor in a city where the land and water interact to great advantage. That's the world-famous bridge. And beneath it, the renowned Opera House. There's even an amusement park in the harbor with a feathered visitor. The Aussies relish their sports. But what's really special are the beaches like Bondi that are an integral part of the town. And lovely parks with extraordinary trees. We'll see more of the environs of Sydney a little later. Cape Town, South Africa is nestled under a nearby mountain. Here, as in Sydney, the city sits near the water. There's statuary, churches, and slums. Our hotel was perched on a hill overlooking the city, with both wide-angle and telephoto views. I haven't been to London for a number of years and can't seem to locate the old pictures, so we'll save London for another day. Although I did find some worthwhile shots of nearby Oxford. Now we're in Italy. This is a wide-angle shot of the Colosseum in Verona. Here's the cathedral in Milan. And the dome of a nearby structure. The bridges over the Arno in Florence. You know whose leg that is. This is St. Mark's Square in Venice. More legs, this time equine. The Bridge of Sighs. The view over a well-traveled canal. And the ubiquitous gondolas. Ah, Paris, my favorite photographic venue outside New York. I've assembled some of my better photos, all taken on a single visit 10 years ago in November. And here's the most notable of all civic landmarks, the Eiffel Tower, in all its daytime and nocturnal glory. Dominating the Seine, the open spaces, the fancy shops, the famed avenues, the hotels, even the gates, and kiosks, and demonstrators, the parks. I awoke early each morning I was there to get the best shots just before sunrise. Then over to the most notable of all cathedrals, Notre Dame, which presents itself very well in black and white. Just look. The Arc de Triomphe, with a plaque honoring heroes, and with great sight lines from the top. The cafes, the food, the statuary. De Gaulle. And with a bow to France's ally, Churchill. Paris is for lovers. Lots of bridges. They're wonderful, especially at dusk, but best at night. Cemeteries, the Louvre, I could swear she's looking right at me. Winged Victory. When confronted by this masterpiece, I broke out into the refrain of "Love is just around the corner." Venus de Milo was noted for her charms, but strictly between us, you're cuter than Venus, and what's more, you've got arms. Here's a stately building with superannuated armaments. Now we're in the artistic quarter, and above it, the towering Sacré-Cœur. Looking down from the cathedral. We'll close this segment with a typical shot of Paris by night. Still international, but closer to home, are the Canadian cities. We start with Montreal. Can you see that Loch Ness Monster look-alike in the background? That's the Olympic Stadium, built for the 1976 Summer Olympics. There's a fine blend in Montreal between the old and the new, between statuary and churches, with elegant interiors. This picture is a good example of what doesn't work especially well in black and white. See the tower that doesn't stand out from the rest? Well, here's how it looks in color. If you're in Montreal, be sure to take a short trip over to Quebec. That landmark building is the Chateau Frontenac Hotel. The diagonal lines work well in black and white. Many churches in Quebec. And a boisterous street scene. We visited Vancouver in April 5 years ago, a city presenting numerous photographic opportunities, especially with the mountains as a backdrop. The building and mountains almost seem to be touching. Here's the view from Granville Island, where some impromptu entertainment is taking place. This looks a little like a rounded version of Manhattan's Flatiron Building. Vancouver's Chinatown. A harbor view. There are good bars and restaurants. This big crowd out for a road race displays the dynamic and diversified Vancouver population. But about those nearby mountains, this was a lucky shot. The suspension bridge is just a little outside of town, as is Grouse Mountain. We'll begin this survey of U.S. cities with the westernmost outpost, Honolulu, nestled under a mountain. Or nestled under a palm tree. Or several of them. All of which is especially scenic at dusk. Returning now to the mainland, here are a few shots of Seattle. My Navy icebreaker was stationed there back in the late 50s, but I took no photos. These are from a trip in 2009. The city has grown a lot since my early days there. But what hasn't changed, and what I remember most, is a lot of rain. When the sky's clear, you can see snow-capped peaks afar off. Of all the U.S. cities outside New York, I think San Francisco offers the finest photographic opportunities. I've visited the city by the bay a number of times, and here's a sampling of the countless photos I've taken. There's an adjacent shoreline that's quite impressive. Architecturally, the Transamerica building always catches the eye, from any angle, even through the limbs of a tree, which which also frames the Coit Tower on Telegraph Hill. The hills make San Francisco truly distinctive. And from the top of many, you can see the bay. To deal with the hills, the unique cable cars were developed years ago and still operate. Top of Nob Hill stands the Mark Hopkins Hotel. It looks down on the venerable Pacific Union Club and the statuary of Huntington Park. Union Square is downtown, offering a number of interesting vistas. Here are the fishing boats at Fisherman's Wharf. That's Alcatraz. And here's our first glimpse of the most photographed span in America, the Golden Gate Bridge. These first three shots are from the south, but west of the bridge. Fewer tourists are aware of this view. This better-known view is from the north end of the bridge. It's a good spot to observe the effects of the frequent fog banks. Now we're back on the city side to the east, in the most familiar setting. These last two combine the boats at Fisherman's Wharf with the fog and the bridge. There are some handsome homes in San Francisco. Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam. They roam, believe it or not, in Golden Gate Park. This pedestrian pier juts out into the bay not too far from the Oakland Bay Bridge. From it, you get this view of the city. The Navy was out in force that day. Back on solid ground, I ran into these Amazons. What are all these people watching? Why, it's the Navy's famed Blue Angels. Look at them go. But the scariest moment is when they scatter. From the sublime to the glorification of kitsch, Las Vegas. This is, admittedly, a little tough to render in black and white. But here's a good no-frills candidate. As opposed to this clutter. Hey, isn't that the tower from Paris? Now we're outside Caesar's Palace. Here's the man himself. And wait a second, wasn't this sculpture in the Louvre? Nothing subtle about the mode of transportation in Vegas. Or the hotel lobbies. Or hallways. Which, in fairness, do house some quality shops. And how's this for a modest pool? And now on to Chicago. Here's one of the views from the 103rd floor sky deck of the Willis Tower, formerly known as the Sears Tower. In terms of big buildings, Chicago, in my view, stands at the top of the U.S. architectural heap. Here's the shoreline of Lake Michigan in wide angle and in close-up. This is a vertigo-inducing shot. Look at the geometry of this clover leaf. How did this guy sneak in there? Now we're down on the ground and looking up at the 100-story John Hancock Center. And these fine sights. Here are three interesting juxtapositions of old and new. A bridge over the Chicago River and a winged intruder. Here's the river on its path to flow into Lake Michigan. And here's the river going the other way. One of the plazas that make for fine viewing. I really like reflections in the windows of the buildings. This is the elevated railroad of the Loop. Here's Millennium Park. A few bridge shots. A brief museum stop. A visit to Navy Pier. And we'll close Chicago with this shot. Hey, you know what colors are in the flag. I like this one in black and white. Now we're in downtown Boston. An impressive church. The Boston Brownstones. I'm not sure what to make of this shot. Here's the same church from above. Boston can get pretty misty, but it usually clears. The Boston Common and Public Garden are right in the middle of town. Fine viewing. A foggy day in Boston town. The statue is in front of the State House. Now across the Charles River to Cambridge, and one obligatory shot of Harvard Law School, where I spent 3 tough years in the early 60s. And a quick trip to Concord, and Emerson's rude bridge that arched the flood. Where the Minutemen performed valiant service. When I go down to Washington, I like to take the Acela, and here's the handsome train station at the end of the line. The Capitol Building, symbol of our nation, but more impressive at night. Lots of monuments in Washington, and statuary for birds to perch on. Hey, check out who else is availing himself of this perch. Here are several views of the Treasury Building. And the Supreme Court. Equal justice under law. The White House, of course. And my favorite structure, the Jefferson Memorial, here viewed from across the tidal basin. Then from close-up. And here's Thomas J. himself. Looking from there back across the water to the Washington Monument after cherry blossom time. Now across the reflecting pool. This shot of the base of the Washington Monument gives you some idea of how huge it is. The Lincoln Memorial. What a man. FDR too, plus his Scotty Fowler. The National World War II Memorial. The Korean War Veterans Memorial. The words read, "Our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met." The Vietnam Veterans Memorial and the tributes enshrined in the memorial wall. Here's a technique I've enjoyed utilizing in recent years. I call it a touch of color, which, as you can see, consists of restoring the original color to a key portion of a photo that has been otherwise converted to black and white, like the Sauvignon Blanc and Rosé at Auberge in Napa. It's not that difficult to do on the computer, and I'd be happy to show the technique to anyone interested. The idea here is for the touch of color to call the viewer's attention to what the photographer considers significant in the photo, such as the gold dome of the State House in Boston. In this black and white photo, it isn't immediately obvious what I liked about the image, until the spot of color reveals our little dog Buffy taking in the window washer's precarious perch. The technique can be very effective when applied to something iconic, like San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge, where the color of the bridge has long been etched in everyone's mind's eye. It's okay, but less effective, where the viewer figures that the full color photo wouldn't be much different from the touch of color version, as is the case here in the Alps. The colored surface can be large, as is this character from Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, or small, like the end of this sunset in Hawaii. It can be a little piece of a large object, or all of a smaller one. The touch of color can help place the viewer in a certain location, such as in Vegas. In the all black and white version, the locale may be ambiguous, but with a touch of color, you know you're in France. In Paris, to be precise, and here's a merry scene from another part of that photogenic city. Children are prime subjects for the touch of color. Check out this little girl, first with FDR and Fala at the Roosevelt Memorial in Washington, and later eyeing the broken men on a Great Depression breadline. Or how about this lad mimicking the Civil War reenactors? Or the young girl fearing the four-gun fusillade at a Memorial Day ceremony. From the same event, here's one of my favorite touch of color images. Here's a less serious soldier with a pair of World War II Rosies the Riveters. For a comic touch of color, how about this scene on a Fire Island pathway? Meanwhile, here are some artworks on the nearby beach. If you come across something that appears absurd, what's this New York City hydrant doing in the Connecticut woods? It may be a good candidate for the process. It works well to emphasize a recurring pattern. The touch of color lets you know you're in a certain well-known venue, such as Sydney Harbor, or in Rockport, Massachusetts, where the Red Fishing Shack is the focal point of the view known to artists as motif number 1. It can lend itself to making up stories, like why does this otherwise drab fellow fancy a yellow hat and a red knee brace? Or what's the tale behind this balding gentleman in the ornate doorway? The touch of color can be used with wildlife, such as these two large beaked birds, or to bring to view this tiny fellow hopping a ride on a huge Cape buffalo. But the animal I like best is this sculptured version found off the beaten path in South Africa. Let's say you convert a group photo from color to black and white, but you'd like to cue the viewer as to your whereabouts. The touch of color does the trick. It's only fitting to close this segment with nature's own original and enduring touch of color. Now we turn to photos of people, and because so many of the ones I like are inextricably bound up with the accompanying geography, we'll go at this by locale, such as here on the New Jersey shore. Our first stop is Tokyo, a city bedecked with shrines. And where 3 of the men are conducting some outdoor business. This fisherman is on a Hong Kong beach, presumably bathing his boat with fresh water. Now we're in Sydney, Australia, famed for its in-town beaches, great waves and fetching women. Powerful lumberjacks felling a high one. Thoughtful gamesmen. Winsome little girls. And fearsome little boys. and on the street, Aborigines playing their didgeridoos. Remember Cape Town, South Africa? Well, there's a market in the center of town where I encountered this woman and child, this young girl. And a few yards away, this cleric. Outside of town, this young man was emerging from shantytown. And these women were lunching in the fields. I was too overwhelmed by the sights of Paris to give much thought to the residents, but here are a few of them. Here's a high-class evening beach scene in Cabo, Mexico, and some entertainment for diners. By the ukes, you know you're in Hawaii, where surfboards rule, and the kids are heading out to fish. In San Francisco, for those who pass up the cable cars, there are some steep steps, and some shallow ones for a noontime snooze in Union Square. Beyond the gulls stretch the beaches of Santa Monica, California, full of sunbathers and waders. I was fascinated by this tug of war. Hooray! From the Santa Monica Pier, you can fish or elevate. Some nearby chess enthusiasts. Walk a ways down the beach and you're in Venice, where you can be evaluated. Take a snooze or feed a pigeon. A quick musical stop in Chicago outside the zoo, and downtown on Liberty. Back on the East Coast for a brief stop at a Princeton reunion, and in Easton, Connecticut for some Memorial Day salutes. This is the Coney Island Boardwalk. And now we're in Manhattan's Times Square, which is heavily patrolled nowadays. But that doesn't stop these patriotic folk. Or this exhibitionist. But who's watching? She is. In Yankee Stadium, the ground crew performs to the strains of YMCA. If you're around on Halloween, be sure to take in the costume contest at Goddard Riverside Senior Center. In Central Park, you can pay tribute to John Lennon, or you can check the news in comfort. When snowfalls cover the park, some mellow sounds can still be heard. and a young boy digs deep. On Veterans Day, there's a big parade in Manhattan, honoring, among others, the vets of World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, and those with disabilities. I never did figure out what these cowboys were up to. But if this guy causes any trouble, the Canine Corps is on hand. But let me close this tribute with a poignant shot. Some of the best people pictures can be taken in New Orleans. It's a city full of music. This guy is playing right outside the Café du Monde with his famed beignets. Nothing slows them down. He's making real music here. And so is this street-side band. And Miss Washboard. But here's my favorite musician photo. She's on her way. And so is he. But this guy's on the fence. The buskers are out in force. Is my favorite getup. There's another, less affirmative side to the population of New Orleans, as shown in these next photos. In this section, we're dealing with landscapes, like Japan's Mount Fuji, and other scenic attractions, like this boat in Hong Kong. The area around Sydney, Australia has a notable coastline, and the Three Sisters rock formation in the nearby Blue Mountains. And how about these folks out for a stroll on the ledge? There's lots of cattle in the outback. And steaks on the Barbie. Here's Cape Town under the mountain, with these spires sticking out. From Cape Town's rugged shore, you drive south, and a little further south, and a little further. And then you're at the Cape of Good Hope, the southernmost point of the African continent, with the oceans crashing on the rocks below. These next three photos were taken in northern Italy. Now we're approaching the Dolomites, the glacial Italian mountains, where this next scenic batch are all set. Pretty good in black and white, huh? The next grouping of photos all emanate from the area of France between the Alps and the city of Lyon. Isn't this wonderfully weird? See that church on top of the hill? Here it is up close. Now we're in Cabo, Mexico. And this rock formation is really something. See those outcroppings that look like toes? Well, here's Barbara's actual foot to give you some idea of the size involved. And here's the rest of Barbara to give scale to the whole thing. We're back in Hawaii. And in the interior of Oahu, I and several bathers ran across a waterfall. But the scenic glory here lies along the coast, as you'll see in this next series of photos. This is the sea segment of Carmel by the Sea, California. Here are some white birds. And here's a gazillion black ones. As for these seals, or sea lions as the case may be, they look pretty comfortable. Along the Pebble Beach 17-mile drive stands the famed lone cypress, one of the most photographed trees in North America. This golf course is also along the drive. Now we're up the California coast, well north of San Francisco, in the town of Mendocino. And as you'll see in these next shots, the magnificent shoreline of the Pacific Ocean. The roadway's 180-degree turns, and the awesome bridges. Beneath these mountains lie the lush vineyards of Napa Valley, which I'll let speak for themselves. Now we're in New Mexico, heading north from Albuquerque. To the enchanting land of Taos, where the rest of these pictures were taken. Well, it's time to head home with a stop at Fire Island. Home, in this case, is the place we escape to on weekends, Easton, Connecticut. All year round. Spring, summer, fall. Oh hell, you really need color for this one. And winter. My favorites are the tree attacking the home, the redundant sign reading "This trail closed," and the scene I always think of as what a Union soldier would see when at long last he returns home from the Civil War. Want to make that black and white image look like a vintage print? Convert it to sepia, just a simple software button away, and now that Civil War veteran has really come home. Or how about this Parisian scene with nothing too modern intruding? It works with a bird's eye view from St. Mark's Square in Venice, as well as this stately courtyard. I like it for certain statues, such as this one from Paris. And although orange and black Princetonians might object, it suits this old tiger and 19th century dorm, as well as aging carousel ponies. It has to be used sparingly on people, but it's okay for these parading Civil War warriors and their World War I compatriots. Or this Canadian tourist guide costumed for olden times. I like sepia for churches, although rather than a cathedral like this, what I have in mind is this backcountry Canadian house of worship, or its counterpart in rural France. And where there's a church, there are often some tombstones, as was this loving daughter reunited with her father in 1802. Sometimes it's just a cemetery, such as this one in the Ardennes, holding the British soldiers felled in the Battle of the Bulge. This black and white view of the tombstones in Arlington National Cemetery, with the somber tread of the funeral cortege in the background, has long been one of my prize images. it too does well in sepia. Other old buildings are also good subjects for sepia, as in this rooftop view over Manhattan's West End Collegiate Church, or this house in Charleston, or this Napa Valley winery, or this old building in Princeton receiving the late afternoon shadows from a stately tree. And I'll close this segment with two evocative structures in New Orleans. Well, that's about it. Thanks for accompanying me on this black and white roller coaster ride. Have I left anything out? Oh yeah, I forgot to include any panoramas. These, as you can see, do quite well in black and white. But that's an image for another day. As for now, like this Italian gentleman, it's time for a little octogenarian nap. But I hope you'll be incentivized to consider converting some of your future photographic efforts